all for joining us for our last webinar of our Communications for Fierce Advocacy trainings. Really appreciate y'all coming out every month to these. This is our last one, specifically around developing and leveraging relationships with reporters. So I'm going to let Zaria take it on from here.
Yeah, so y'all have been with us for a while, but just going through our norms again. Assume best intentions, be present as much as you can and keep an open mind. Speak your truth wherever you're coming from. Listen to understand and focus on solutions, and then always celebrate success. I know a lot of us are finishing up the school year, just finished testing, so take time to celebrate those things. Today, we're going to be looking at leveraging and creating relationships with reporters. So this specific training, you'll hear from a reporter and you'll learn how to use your social media to build relationships. And you'll learn how to do a media scan of which reporters are in your network. And we opened up this opportunity a few weeks ago, but for those who have attended 2 to 3 of these monthly sessions, and also submit proof of application of learning, which can look like a bunch of things based on the different sessions we've had. It could be advocating at a school board meeting or the Capitol. It could be posting on LinkedIn or your social media. And it could also be writing an op-ed, and these are just a few things. But we've now created a form where you can show exactly which opportunity you engaged in. So we'll add this to our follow-up email at the end of the session. I'll also put it in the chat, and this will be the way that we can gauge who completed those 2 to 3 sessions, as well as proof of application of learning. And these forms will be due May 27th so that we can get those stipends out to you all as soon as possible. And here's our agenda for today. So we're going through intros now. Next, we'll go through establishing who is in your network and which reporters and outlets are in your area. We'll talk about leveraging social media networks to build relationships. And then we'll hear from a reporter. And you'll also be able to ask her some questions in the Finding Your Voice in Lane section. And then we'll wrap up for this last webinar. We'll give you some next steps for your summer, as well as the rest of your educational advocacy journey. And our guest speaker, who will be joining us a little bit later, is Annie. She is a national K-12 reporter at AP News, and you'll be able to hear a little bit more about her journey and her career a little bit later.
Yeah, so before Annie hops on, really quickly, we just want to touch on ways you can start engaging with reporters in your network. So the first thing you need to know is who is in your network. So identifying reporters and outlets in your community is crucial. Really quickly, just want to touch on the different types of outlets or reporters you can consider following. So for many of you that are, living in local communities, local news outlets and reporters are the best people to develop a relationship and be in touch with. So these are going to be your outlets that typically cover regional or local stories, and they cover a broad range of topics specific to that region. So note that these are the reporters that don't specifically have a beat. So they're not specifically just going to report on education. They're going to report on a broad range of issues that affect the community. And just another thing to note is that these reporters are also usually experience higher turnover. So that's just something to keep in mind when you're building relationships. So for example, if I am in Texas, you're going to see, your local news outlets such as the San Antonio Express News, Houston Chronicle, Dallas Morning News. These are all local news outlets and reporters to consider following. You can consider following national trade news outlets and reporters. So if it's the education trade, they're going to specifically cover that topic of education. So you're going to have reporters that are specifically have a bucket of work in education, whether that's higher ed, whether that's K through 12, whether that's school funding. So these are the reporters that are gonna have a little bit more of a specific issue. So some reporters are for these might look like your reporters at Ed Week, at the Heckinger Report, at the 74. These are very popular trade news outlets in the education space that I would consider following. Then you have, of course, your national news outlets and reporters, which is what Annie is, which they do cover a wider range of content that has a wide-ranging influence in because they touch on topics that affect usually the whole country or the nation, and they cover national trends or stories. So these are your big ones like AP News, USA Today, New York Times, that are touching on really broader influences that are happening across the country. And then, of course, you also have ethnic media. This is the media that specifically has an audience of a particular ethnic community. So, if you're in the Latino community, there are certain ethnic media that portray specifically to the Latino community. If you identify as Black, there is also like Black ethnic media that you should consider following. Same with, Native news outlets. There are several different ethnic media sources out there that are just like a good way to see how issues are reported around a specific community. And just other mediums to consider. So local TV, radio, podcasts are also a really good way to follow what's happening locally. Your national TV, radio, podcast, this is your NPR, your NBC, your PBS, NewsHour, the bigger TV, radio stations. Online and print magazines are also great to follow, university newspaper and radio. And of course, just social media. A lot of us nowadays consume digitally or news digitally through social media. So it's always great. It's always great to follow those big voices and influencers that are reporting on a lot of these big news, either pop culture or not, politics wise, that you should consider being plugged into also. So just want to touch on, now that we know the different types of news outlets and reporters that you might consider following, there's different ways that you can do a media scan to identify reporters and news outlets. So obviously there's a broad range of tools. Some are paid services that you would need to do, but if obviously we want to consider free tools that are out there to do a media scan, I would consider these. Google News is great to identify articles and find reporters that are speaking about issues you care about. Google Alerts, if you really are like adamant about following one particular subject matter or issue, it's a great way to kind of get your twice a day alerts about what's happening around that issue. Twitter is obviously a great place to follow your news network, reporters, and outlets. LinkedIn is another growing platform to engage, and just seeing what other leaders and advocates you follow are posting about, whether that's, another educator that's really loud in the advocacy space, a principal, a researcher, or an organization you really admire. These are all really good different people and orgs to follow. So I'm gonna really quickly show you how I go about kind of being in touch with what's happening in the news. A lot of times what I do is like conduct a media scan to kind of see what's happening either particularly in a state or particularly around an issue area. So I will reshare my screen. So here's an example of how I would use Google News. So if I'm particular to like a region, so let's say I'm living in Nashville, or if I'm living in Tennessee, and I want to find reporters and outlets that specifically talk about education in that area, I can go to Google News, and I want to make my search as specific as I can be. So I can type in education, Nashville, Tennessee. And I'm going to look for articles that might catch my attention and are speaking to issues that I care about. So, for example, key education issues to watch as Tennessee lawmakers return to Nashville. This is by Chalkbeat. Chalkbeat is a trade news outlet. They focus a lot of times just on education. So, Chalkbeat Tennessee would be an outlet that I would follow. And then I would specifically look at the reporter and kind of see what their beat is and what they specifically report on. And for this one, this is Marta. She's a senior state house correspondent, so she's going to probably talk more state government politics, but how it ties into education. So she might be someone I would consider following and engaging with on social media if I really want to focus on the legislature and what bills are passing in Tennessee that might affect the classroom. So that's just one way Google News can be helpful. Another tool that can be helpful is Google Alerts. So as you see here, I have tons of Google Alerts. Am I tracking all of these? No, not all the time, just because there's so much time you have in a day, but it's just a great way to kind of get maybe a daily summary. If you set aside 10 to 5 minutes of your day to kind of read up on news, you can create a news alert. So if I am particularly interested in, if I live in Delaware and I'm interested in education equity, I can just make an alert for Delaware education equity. And what I'll get in my inbox is kind of just an overview of that. So for example, Delaware education funding is one that I follow. North Carolina educator diversity is another one that I follow. So some of the times you'll find articles that align with what you want, but other times there are some that aren't really relevant. But it's just a good way that I keep up with who's reporting around this issue area in that state. I make sure I follow them and I, get their contact information and begin kind of reading some of the work that they do. So I can start developing a relationship that way. So gonna go back to the slides. So that's just one way you can use Google News and Google Alerts, but obviously you want to make sure that it's something that you use daily or weekly, and you don't feel overwhelmed by the amount of information that's given to you. But that's just one way you can do a media scan to kind of set up that beginning step of identifying who's in your network, who's reporting on the issues you care about, and begin to follow them and read up on some of the pieces that they write. So now that I showed you how to use Google News and Google Alerts, I'm going to ask that you kind of take 5 minutes to do your own scavenger hunt. So we're going to give about 5 minutes on the clock, and I would like you to get at least 2 out of 3 of these checklist items. So you either need to identify and follow one reporter who reports on an issue you care about, identify and follow one news source that is credible and that you will read often, or find one article or written piece that resonates with an issue you care about. So whether your preferred platform is LinkedIn or social media or Facebook even, I'm going to give you about 5 minutes to go into your preferred social media platform, or if you just want to do it right now on, Google Chrome, so you can kind of create your list before following them. That's totally okay, but I'm going to give you 5 minutes to go ahead and do that. And then after the 5 minutes, we'll share in the chat who you followed and what news source you are going to start following. So I'll go ahead and put the timer on for there and let you go ahead and do that scavenger hunt. And if you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat too. All right, you have about 2 minutes left. All right, last 40 seconds. All right, we're gonna come back and have you share out maybe either if you did all two or just one of them. Would love for you to share in the chat or out loud, either a reporter or a news source or an article that resonated with you. And it's okay if you only did one. So I think Zaria put, can you read that, Zaria? Sorry.
Yes, these were from Sarah.
Got
She had found 2 articles or written pieces that she cared about. One on belonging, and Sarah, I don't know what the other one is on.
Sorry, it was just the AP education, like the news source that is credible to use the AP
Oh, awesome.
education. Yeah. And I meant just I think I sent it back to the group, so apologies for that.
Thank you, Sarah. And Delilah, I know you're on the road, but if you have anything to share, feel free to also come off mute.
I'm actually home now. I've been listening. I um I actually follow James Tallarico. He's a really awesome person here in Texas, and I'm following him because I work for UT Austin now. So, and we're a research, I work in research now, and I'm part of the Atom Project. And we tried to get through TEA to help us get into schools with the San Antonio area.
Oh, great.
But they said no. They're not going to help us. So what I've done is, since I've taken a lot of these classes and everything and done a lot of fellowships with education policy, I turned it to more advocacy. So we have already drafted a letter to just, maybe get his support and everything. So I follow him a lot. And I do follow some news sources. I just don't have them on hand right now. But yeah, I just wanted to put that out there. Like I all this work that you guys have been doing, the Ed Trust and all the webinars have really helped, helped me with my new job, and have opened others' eyes as well, because I really don't tell much about about my advocacy work, but with my new job, they are very much interested, and my knowledge of the education field and everything has really helped them. So yeah, still glad to be here. And I am here. I'm just home
Oh,
right
yeah.
now.
No, thanks so much for sharing.
You're
And
welcome.
you shared, something, someone of high profile worth following, and he is very much, you probably already know, like he was a former teacher. He shares a lot of articles around what's happening in education, especially right now in Texas, everything that's happening at UT Austin, with SB 17, and keeping track of what's happening around that anti-DEI legislation. He is very much someone who is very supportive of educators. You can reach out to him and his staff directly, and he's very willing to, meet with you and talk to you, and offer support however he can. So really thank you
Yeah.
for sharing that.
Yeah,
He's a
no,
great
yeah,
source.
that's where we're going towards. And so yeah, I once we had the like TA said no, because we did have a special education head honcho in there that was really for it, but I guess like they went to the head people, which AKA probably Mike Morath, and he said no. And this work just really needs to be done throughout Texas, and we need to know the prevalence of just Texas with autism and developmental abilities. So
Yeah. Thank you for your advocacy.
you're welcome. Thank you.
Um, But yeah, just some of the things that you all have already mentioned are just, tips for developing a relationship with reporters. So now that you have this list, or are beginning to build this list of just journalists, and reporters and outlets to kind of follow and engage with, you can foster a relationship simply by reaching out unprompted without a pitch. That's probably the best way to build an authentic relationship. Beginning to set up your Google alerts and your Twitter lists and following them and engaging with them on socials, sending them a quick email to, again, you don't know, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So it's always worth reaching out, asking if you could have a one-on-one with them to just learn more about them, the beat and the type of issues they report on, consuming their content, knowing how they report on an issue. That's super important. And remember that, even though they might just cover one specific issue, it doesn't mean that another issue is not of importance to them. It's all intersectional. You know, education touches multiple policy issues, so it's important to kind of make sure that you're making that connection too, about how all of these issues interconnect and are interrelated and affect communities. And just, you know, begin engaging with them, reacting to their content in meaningful ways. Social media is an easy way to do that. And even offering your resources and support. If you see an event that might align with what they report on, feel free to share it with them. Share a recent research study, a recent article that you might have found interesting. All of those go a long way in developing a relationship. So with that, I'm going to quickly just touch on leveraging social media to build relationships, because I do want to give time for Annie to speak and kind of do a Q&A with us. But here on the right, you're going to see a screenshot of how one person here at EdTrust, you know, went out of her way to kind of share with a reporter. His name is Eric Hoover. I believe he was reporting a lot on the FAFSA issues that were happening in the higher education space. And she simply shared one of our webinars that she was leading around, you know, helping students from mixed status families use a tool that we created to kind of help fill out the FAFSA among complications that they were dealing with. And that was just one easy way to kind of build that relationship, get him interested, and kind of get his ear. So just get to know your reporter's writing an angle. You know, she wouldn't have shared that webinar if she didn't know what he already reported on and followed him. Follow reporters and begin to engage with their content. You can do that the same with influencers and, you know, our political leaders that you might follow, like Delilah just said with James Tallarico. Reshare their content, comment on their pieces, share a resource, and just begin to establish yourself little by little as either a content expert in your area or as a spokesperson, by building that advocacy voice on socials, as we've talked about previously in other trainings. And just be consistent, whether that's, you know, taking time once a day in your schedule to kind of go about and do that, or if it's every other day, just build it into your routine. And just, you know, be authentic, reach out, celebrate them, check in with them, and invite them to any events that you might have in your school community. But that's a quick overview. Want to give time for Annie to kind of share her expertise. I'm going to pass it to Zaria so she can introduce Annie, and Annie so she can introduce herself. But yes, on to you, Zaria.
So y'all, we are joined by Annie, who is currently a reporter at the Associated Press, where she covers education, race, and inequality. Previously, she covered Charlotte Mecklenburg schools for the Charlotte Observer. Before that, she spent her time in California covering local news for the San Francisco Chronicle and learning the ins and outs of putting together a magazine at Mother Jones. In college, she interned at the that's a mouthful. Oregon, Ian, the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, and Chalkbeat, New York. Annie, I don't know if there's anything else you want to share about yourself before we get into a bit of a Q&A, but thank you so much for joining us.
No, I think you covered it. Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to jump right in.
Yeah, so I'm going to ask you a few questions and then we'll open up to everyone else if they have some questions for you. But it would be great to know, as a reporter touching on some issues in education, can you share a little bit more about the importance of teacher voice in media?
Yeah, I think it's really important for a lot of reasons. I think one thing that people don't necessarily realize is like so much of what shapes our reporting is conversations that don't necessarily get quoted in stories. One of the things that has been really helpful in just conversations I have with teachers is to know, you know, like what issues are you seeing in your classrooms? What issues are you seeing in your communities? And like being aware of what's on your mind helps me and other reporters know what questions we should be asking and what should we be focusing on. I also think that, you know, there are a lot of stakeholders in schools. There's a lot of people who make a lot of decisions, but really at the end of the day, it's the students and the teachers who are in the classroom every day, and being able to like center voices that reflect what that looks like and that can speak to those experiences is really important. And I think like, you know, there are many places for teachers' voices to be heard, including advocacy in your community, speaking at legislative hearings and speaking at the school board, but it's also like getting your name in a story, getting your position and your voices out there spreads really quickly through networks. And so that's just something that I think is really important.
So once you've heard from like teachers and educators, how do you decide, or who decides which topics you write on or that are published?
Yeah, it can vary a lot newsroom to newsroom. So right now I write about national education issues, kind of looking at things that are affecting schools across the country. But before this job, I covered a single school district. And depending on which reporter you're talking to, they probably fall in like one of those two buckets. I think for national reporters, we have a lot more leeway at looking at identifying things we hear from teachers, things we hear from parents, students, experts, and like being able to take more of a step back and look at how things affect just schools as at large. I'm thinking about like we did a projects that we've done at AP are kind of about chronic absenteeism, disparities in discipline. They're sort of more like policy issues that we get to explore through individual schools. But for when I was in local reporting, a lot more of what I covered, I got to write about those issues and how they affected Charlotte, but a lot more of what I was covering was just like the day-to-day operations of the schools. Part of that was because I was there during COVID, so it was like, we're going to be in person, are we not going to be in person? What's the mask policy going to be? But for your local reporters, they're going to have more of a like burden of covering like what is happening day to day, but they'll still be doing those like sort of deeper dives within the district that they cover.
Thank you. You shared a little bit about the importance of educator voice to inform your writing. How do you go about engaging with those educators and stakeholders, both like the process of that and like, do you seek out educators? Do you have a long list of educators who are waiting to speak to you?
Yeah, I could always use a longer list. So anyone who's on this call is free to reach out to me anytime. Yeah, I think there's like a couple of buckets. There are sort of the proactive conversations that Andrew was talking about. Like when I was in Charlotte, I would just get coffee with teachers. I wouldn't like report on anything they said. I just kind of wanted to hear like what's going well, what's not going well. What do you think we should be writing more about? What's hard for the kids, what's going well for the kids, and just kind of having those conversations I think is a really good foundation for building relationships, particularly with like local newspaper journalists. It's a little bit different now that I cover national education. I've had educators reach out to me just to like talk about things that are going on in their district, and I'm happy to do those conversations. They're a little less fun because they're like over the phone or Zoom unless people are in the DC area. But I still have those conversations for kind of shorter term stories or stories where like I've decided that I'm going to write about ethnic studies. You know, there are a lot of like networks to reach out to teachers who have done some advocacy on this, who've indicated a willingness to speak about these issues. For one of the stories that we did on a similar topic, I think I reached out to like the National Association of Social Science Teachers. I forget exactly what that professional organization is called, but through them I got in touch with teachers who I didn't have a previous relationship with, but who I was able to talk to like day of or like within that news cycle to kind of form their give them space to kind of like voice their experiences. I don't know, I feel like I'm rambling. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yes, that definitely does. And that kind of gets into my next question, because it seems like advice would be to join one of those groups, so that you can be plugged in with what's going on. But do you have any advice or other suggestions, ways educators can build relationships with reporters in their states?
Yeah, I think like one of the things that sometimes I think that one thing that I have come to appreciate and become better about navigating is that like there's always going to be a bit of a power dynamic that is like that you're navigating when you're talking to journalists, not because like we have power over like teachers or anything, but sometimes districts don't want you to talk to reporters. Sometimes there's all these other considerations that take place, and just to kind of remember that like good journalists are also good people, and we just want to hear like what your experiences are, and kind of like start from a place of what was said earlier around just like building genuine connections with people. I think like talking to reporters can take a lot of forms, and it can look like a lot of different things. There are those sort of like off the record, like casual conversations. There's the like times where you're like using that conversation to like talk about a certain issue in particular. When I think about like the other buckets of stories that I've done, there have also been stories where like I've just like gotten coffee with a teacher who like said something about one of the best examples that I have just of the importance of these sort of like casual conversations is I was talking to a teacher. He's like, yeah, there's like something weird happening with this like literacy platform. They sent out this like weird survey and they asked us a bunch of questions. And so I asked the district for a copy of the survey, and that was like the basis of a big investigative project we did about like the district's contracting process. And so like that teacher, he was not cluing me in on some like grand conspiracy that he knew of, but it was an important piece of like public service journalism that wouldn't have happened if I didn't have, if like he wasn't the kind of person to just like chit chat and like share observations. So I think that my advice is just to really like find out who's covering the district that you work in, or who's writing about issues in a way that that resonate with you, and just reach out and have those informal conversations, because by the time that like by the time that a story comes around, they'll have your name front of mind, and probably be, like it'll be front of mind to make those connections. And then the other thing I will say is like kind of like the professional organizations that I was talking about. If there are, I mean, EdTrust is a great example, but there are tons of like subject area groups, a lot of affinity groups within teaching and professional circles, even more like informal circles. Like first I did on mental health, there's like an informal group of like Black women who are school psychologists, and they had like a Facebook group. And so I was able to like find one person's contact information, and that put me in touch with like a bigger network. So if there's just like something that you're interested in, it's always good to kind of be plugged into that, because a lot of these conversations, like they're great to make. A lot of these connections do happen one-on-one, but sometimes they do kind of happen on deadline and like through like an intermediary of sorts. Advocate on, sorry, I'm just reading the chat. How do you suggest for educators advocate on social media without fear? I think that's really hard. And, like I can say this because I'm on the other side. Obviously, I want to hear from teachers, and I think it's great when we can hear from educators. It's such an important voice. But I just know that like the last district I covered was really strict about the way that people talked, like to the point where it was like nonsensical. Like I can give you an example. Like during COVID, a bunch of kids put together a like canned food drive for some of for classmates, and one of the parents invited me to come, and I was like, great, I'll go down, and I wrote about it. And then but central office was like, no, the teachers can't talk to you about their involvement in this. I was like, there's literally nothing negative that could be said about like your kids organizing a canned food drive, but they just had a very like centralized like hold on communications, and that can be really frustrating. I would say, really leverage like as reporters, the relationship we have with teachers is that we like respect the like we're trying to meet you where you are, and if you can't talk on the record, if you see something and you just want us to know but you can't be quoted on it, like definitely feel comfortable like saying, hey, I think this is an important issue, but there's this but these are my considerations. Can we have a conversation off the record? Can we have a conversation on background? And if it's something that reporter has like the bandwidth to cover, I think that's a good place to start. At the end of the day, like when it comes to social media and reaching out, it really is like a pretty fine balancing act, and it depends on just how hard your district is about these things, and that's something only you can judge. But in terms of like if there's something important that you want to get out there, there's definitely ways to like make those connections with journalists without having to put your name out there. I've written stories before where teachers raised concerns and they weren't named in the story. A lot of times it's easier if there's like if there's like 10 people saying the same thing, then we can say in our story, like 10 teachers who requested anonymity to discuss XYZ because they're worried about their job. Like the more voices collectively that speak out about an issue, the more protection that you have when it comes to that. But yeah, it's a pretty tough balancing act, and I totally appreciate, you know, how hard that is to find for individual people.
Are there any more questions? Thank you, Sarah, for that question. Well, if there's not, Annie, we're so grateful. You dropped so many gems, and we will definitely keep you in the loop. Y'all now know who Annie is as a reporter, so this is also a resource for you as well. But thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much. I have to hop off, but I'll drop my email in the chat. Feel free to reach out anytime, and good luck with all the work that you guys are doing. It was really great to speak to y'all.
Thanks, Annie. And speaking on what Annie kind of touched on, do wanna, you know, she did mention a lot of terms on the record, on background, off the record. Do wanna provide those definitions for you. So like she said, if you're really, you know, struggling with privacy, or if you know you have a very strict district policy around whether you could, you know, engage with reporters, know that you can still, whether you can't be on the record with them, which means that basically everything that you say can be published or quoted directly. First, assume that everything is on record, but if you agree with a reporter that you can be on background or off the record, that means, you know, they're not going to attribute something. Yes, they can use what you say as like to inform their writing or as a resource for their writing, but you will not be, you know, listed. Your name, your role won't be posted in that article or piece. So just some helpful terms to be familiar with. Again, your level of comfortability also comes back to your communications office. And these are just some like helpful tips. If reporters are going to get in touch directly, Annie mentioned professional organizations are a great way that they go about doing that. You know, there can also sometimes be times where they reach out to school districts directly for stories. So if you know that the communications team at your district does go ahead and engage teachers with reporters, feel free to email them that you're interested in speaking with reporters, what topics you're interested specifically, and your availability and schedule. But again, that's only if you know what the policies of your district are, and whether they're okay with teachers speaking with media, because as Annie said, that might not be the case for every district. It might vary. So these are just some helpful tips, whether you want to engage through your district, whether you want to do it outside of your role of a teacher and just as an advocate. That's just something to keep in mind while you're engaging on social media. But yeah, these are just some helpful tips that Annie also spoke to, and we will make sure that these are provided on the slides and the materials afterwards for you to kind of consider. So any questions around there? Other helpful tips for preparing for an interview? But thank you all so much for engaging. We're going to leave these last 8 to 10 minutes to kind of give you some time to, one, give us an overall feedback of how you received these trainings and what we could do better for next cohort and next year if we were to continue engaging with these webinar series. We will provide some resources to consider continuing to interview and building relationships with reporters. But in terms of just wrap up and next steps, continue to identify and following your local reporters to speak to issues you care about, set up those Google alerts, engage with them on socials, join a fellowship, a professional organization, grab some one-on-one time with them. And make sure you just, you know, like, I loved what Annie said, good journalists are good people. And it just goes a long way when you're building that relationship and you share, because reporters do want to hear what you have to say as the people on the ground doing the work day to day. So I will let Zaria kind of lead our feedback session, but we're going to give you a few minutes to fill out this form.
Yeah, so like Andrea said, y'all are our inaugural cohort. We're so grateful for you all because we really tried something new with these trainings and we really hope that it was beneficial to you all, but we don't know what we can do better unless we get some feedback. So I don't like giving people homework. So I wanted to allow 3 minutes, if you will, to get it out the way now. I've dropped the link in the chat and it's a few questions just about each training that you went to. So if you didn't attend the training, don't worry about that session, but we would appreciate some feedback. And we'll start a 3-minute timer with some calming music for you.
I have a question. This is my first, I guess, I don't know, you maybe call it a cohort or like a semester. Have you guys done these previous years, or was this the first time y'all did it?
This is the first time.
Oh, okay. And so you're deciding basically that that's kind of with this feedback form, whether to continue it in the fall or maybe in the early part of next year. Is that what you're all
Yeah,
thinking?
so I think we would appreciate that and like the feedback too, you know, if you will, like kind of thinking about, is this something where we should do it every year with like new cohorts, or like something where you would want to continue like in the fall with like a new batch of information on advocacy? Like that's also information we would appreciate as well, because we don't know what this will look like yet.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Okay, good. Yeah, because that's why I was like, I didn't know the history behind it. I think I found you guys through some network, and then I was like, yeah. And so they've been very helpful for me and learning just more, about all of this. And I feel like my next step, I'm eager to like do more action work, but like almost have time to work. And I can put this in the forum, but I was just kind of wanting to talk, through it with you all of like, okay, but could someone give me that advice, or could we meet, and it be more of like of a open dialogue where we actually like have working time together with either you or Andrea, or experts around the area of these advocacy works, where we could get I don't know, more of like an action project or something like that. Yeah, like yeah. So I'll put that stuff on there. But I was just, yeah, I was like, this has been great. I've been learning a lot, but I don't know what's next. And if I could, that's what I would request. So I'll put that on the forum. Thank you.
We love that feedback.
Yes, this means me and Andrea have more ideas to think about.
I love the idea of a project. I was like, oh,
Yeah.
Well, then, it's like I don't know, sometimes it's scary to do the work alone, or when you maybe don't feel like you're doing it correctly, or you just want to pick somebody's brain to, guide you. I feel like that's what I would like. So yeah, thanks.
Yeah, so thank you, Sarah. Some other things that we have, like we said, this is the first one. So we do have a LinkedIn Educator Network group that we just started maybe a month ago. So hopefully more people will join over time. This can be a group where you can kind of input what's going on in your space or in your district, and get some feedback from others, and just have a discussion or group space to vent to others and talk through things. And we do have an event this week that is open for all. It'll be live streamed. And with the 70th anniversary or commemoration of Brown v. Board, and also this being Mental Health Awareness Month, we're having an event put on and a panel by Black superintendents speaking to how they support mental health within their school districts. So we will send the slides and also the registration link if you would like to attend virtually on Thursday and hear from some of those folks.
It's gonna be good, y'all.
And then kind of thinking through what's next, we put together a document, and this is a living document, so we'll continue to add opportunities as we find them of some things you can engage in throughout the summer. So this document includes like fellowships, internship, professional development opportunities. It also has like different advocacy groups that you can join within your area. So we separated them by region so you can find which region you're a part of and see more specific opportunities.
And it's a living document, so it's gonna keep building. But if you know of other opportunities you'd like to add in there for other educators to know, hopefully this document will keep, being circulated and shared with other teachers.
And like we've said so many times, we're grateful for you all, and like all these webinars have been learning opportunities, and I feel like you've had lots of opportunities to take in information, but we did want to just save and have a space for like a celebration, celebrating success, end of the school year, getting to know each other. So we'll have a celebratory like Zoom. This will be like a wrap up of everything, very informal. We'll also use that time to showcase some of the advocacy things y'all have been doing and share with others. Maybe you'll get some inspiration from that. But we have 2 dates in mind, and we'll send this out via email to kind of get some more feedback on what would be best. But potentially having this celebration on Friday, May 31st or Monday, June 3rd. So if you know now which one would work best for you, you can drop it in the chat. We just want to make sure as many people as possible could attend.
Yeah. And it's going to be open to those that like qualified for the 150 stipend. So definitely take advantage of those $150. I know both of you have come more than twice. So you just need to fill out that stipend form. And yeah, this is going to be a way to kind of celebrate y'all and kind of share each of your learnings and how you applied it. It'll be fun.
Andrea, I
Yes.
have a question.
Mhm.
I know I'm not an educator anymore, so I just want to make sure that I'm still able to go to these. I mean, I feel like I'm still an educator at heart and I'm always continuing to learn. And now I feel like I'm at the forefront. And since I am next to the Capitol, I can always go like right there, then and there. But I just want to make sure that, just.
Yeah, I think you're still a part of it. I mean, I feel like once you are in the classroom and you leave the classroom, you're always an educator at heart. And
Okay.
especially if you're still advocating for students, I think as long as these are still beneficial,
Yeah.
and you can learn from other educators, I think that's really important. And for educators to learn from you too.
Well, yeah, and I think that's why I went into this UT job, because they actually are listening to me as an ex-educator. Like, I mean, this is my background, and so I am looking at IEPs still and like telling them like, what is going on in public education. So I mean, our whole goal for this project is to get educators' voices out and make sure that Texas is getting their, like, public education is getting their resources. So that is the long-term goal. So, okay, thank you.
Thank you. So we'll make sure to share all of this along with the Zoom link for that showcase celebration. But yeah, thank y'all for coming every month, sharing. yeah, we've enjoyed being a part of it and hope you have too. So appreciate y'all. Bye. Have a good one.
Y'all have a good one. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.